Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee STUDCAST.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. It's David Summers. It's another STUDcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. Let's step back into the ring, back into time as we go into the Great Smoky Mountains. That's where we find the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. What's up, my man, Ron?
Oh, geez, man. Glad to be on today. Glad to have the opportunity to talk wrestling with some people around the world, and looking forward to it. We got a good episode today. Wow, a lot of things going on, good and bad. So I think fans are going to find this to be a pretty interesting STUDcast.
Yeah,
now they got 2 territories that makes a big difference. I can tell you that.
Well, I was about to ask you, have you ever owned cats? Have you ever tried to herd cats?
No.
Okay. Well, see, I don't see how you're doing this with 2 territories. And listen, I got to admit, Ron, when I saw the title for this, the 246 STUDcast, The Great Malenko Creates Madness, it got me a little curious because I knew that name instantly because of where I grew up, just miles from the panhandle of Florida, of course. I don't know how many wrestling fans around the world know anything about him, but wrestling fans all over Florida certainly knew him as the most despised heel ever in that state. So I got to ask, even though I think I know, which of the 2 southeastern territories was he going to be creating all of this madness in? And I know you're about to spill that on us.
Yeah, this Dave's going to be a very interesting STUDcast, I think, for fans out there. Malenko was a good friend of mine. I went there in 1970, second territory I ever worked as a young boy, just out of college in 1970. And he kind of took me under his wing, was really treated me nice. And, and we've had pretty much if I had brought him into the southeastern Gulf Coast, that would have been an instant shot in the arm for that territory, especially for those panhandle fans, pretty close to the area where you are, man, because they could see the Tallahassee TV.
Yeah,
a lot of fans, especially in that eastern part of the Panhandle, could see the Tallahassee TV, and they got a big taste of what he was all about. So and because he was on every championship wrestling from Florida TV show, basically from just, I guess, probably in the '60s all the way into the '80s. So but southeastern Gulf Coast, it wouldn't have. It wouldn't have worked for me to bring him there because he made good money. He was a big star. He might have been the biggest heel star in the history of Florida wrestling. And, he was accustomed to making money. So that's kind of an example of why the week of this STUDcast focus, April 10th through Saturday, April 15th of 1978, we're talking about in this show. Southeastern Gulf Coast was running 3 cities. For the first time ever. And 2 of those cities were the first time ever that they'd had shows at all. And it wasn't time there yet, for Malenko's kind of talent to be brought in there. Well, couldn't afford to pay him, and he wouldn't have made money, and he probably wouldn't have stayed. Yeah, Boris Malenko, man, whose real name was Larry Simon. He'd been waiting for more than a year to get his shot in Southeastern wrestling. And he knew he was going to be another top heel when he came in. And he was going to make as much or maybe even more money than what he'd been making in Florida. And he knew, more importantly, that he was going to travel 1,000 miles less a week. So, he had heard from his friend Joe LeDuc. They were pretty close. And others that were working in the territory that he knew about the big money guys were making and the short trips. It's kind of a wrestler's dream, to be honest with you.
No doubt. All right. So, but knowing you, Stud, I bet you had some great ideas for introducing him in Tennessee. But speaking of great ideas, before we get to Southeastern today, I hear you've recorded your second Superstars of the Past show, almost ready to add it to ClassicContinentalWrestling.com streaming channel. So you've got that ready to go. With all this happening in your life, how are you finding the time to keep adding new content to your new streaming channel?
Well, I kind of got the bug, man, for writing with Brutus, and I got involved in it and I really enjoyed it. And Brutus, which obviously is my lion story and it's fiction, of course, but its success kind of given me the urge, man, to do another book. And suddenly here I am, man. I got a YouTube channel and a streaming channel as well. And both of them are based around my wrestling life, my wrestling companies from the past.
Right.
So my family's been in the professional wrestling business for 100 years. And, that maybe makes me knowledgeable enough to write a book about wrestling.
I don't know. You think so, Ron? Okay, so you're coming from the oldest and largest family in the history of this sport, being a wrestler, a booker, owner of 4 successful wrestling companies, and a very successful wrestling podcaster. I would call that qualified. So tell us about the second Superstars of the Past show, soon to be on the ClassicContinentalWrestling.com streaming channel. Who you got? What's that going to be like?
Well, my first wrestling, superstar of the past was Abraham Lincoln, oddly enough. And,
yeah.
But that's a great place to start. I guess one of the most famous people in the history of the world.
Yeah, I was not gonna ask if you knew him because I knew better than that. So, okay.
Well, I don't go back that far.
Okay,
man.
right.
Sometimes I feel like I'm getting pretty close. So, and Lincoln, I really liked. I liked his story because he had 300 wins and he only had 1 loss ever as a wrestler.
Wow.
So my second superstar is one of the many pioneers of the professional wrestling between 1850 and 1900, which there are a bunch of them, man. I've done the research has just been fascinating for me. Mm-hmm. And the guy I picked for number 2 is a guy named Martin. They called him Farmer Burns. And I chose him for several reasons, other than because this guy had 6,000 wins and only 7 losses.
Good God.
So he was a wrestler, man, that actually did it, quite a bit. I guess I probably had about 5,000 matches. So he was there at it for many, many years. So Farmer Burns was called that, obviously, because, crazy enough, he wore overalls to wrestle.
Okay.
And he was the one wrestler, in my opinion, that most influenced professional wrestling after 1900 into the next century, into the 20th century, because of the number of students of the sport he trained after retirement. He trained hundreds of guys, great wrestlers. And one of them was the most well-known professional wrestler of the first decade of the 1900s. That guy was Frank Gotch. So he's likely to be my next superstars of the past. But what really swayed my opinion more about Farmer Burns than anything else was something my grandfather, Roy Welch, told me as a boy. He told me the story of Farmer Burns, who trained a wrestler named Dutch Mantel, who happened to train my granddad, Roy. So that kind of set my family on the path to becoming the oldest and largest family in the sport.
Wow.
So Farmer Burns has a tie-in basically to my family.
Wow. Okay. So anybody that's listened to STUDCAST recognizes, of course, that name, Dutch Mantel, of course. He was mentioned many times in your first 5 STUDCAST, which were all about your grandfather. And we're talking 240 plus weeks ago. So you've been doing this a while. So I know that you're now thinking about also writing another book. Are Farmer Burns and Dutch Mantel going to be a part of your real history of professional wrestling book?
Well, definitely. I think they are. Hey, yes, man. Along with the hundreds of the greatest of all time stars and their stories, man. I want to alert people to all the great wrestlers there were, and all of them have a story. Every one of them has a different story, and they're amazing. So, and when I finish the first chapter of this book, I'm going to be reading it right there, right on the streaming channel. I'll be reading one chapter at a time. Every time I finish a chapter, I'm going to read it on the actual site, and until the book is complete. So, fans will be able to, without buying that book, they'll be able to hear the whole thing.
All right, I could go on asking questions about this subject for at least 2 more STUDcasts, but now back to the start of this STUDcast. I am intrigued by the great Malenko becoming a part of southeastern Knoxville, and wondering how you're going to introduce him to the fans there in that part of Tennessee, especially. Is that where we're riding this week? What's up?
Yeah, that's part of the ride, my man. Yeah, obviously. And southeastern Knoxville fans, they're going to get their first taste of a Russian accent. I don't know that they've ever had a big-time Russian in that eastern part of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And they're going to get that accent from one of the best heels in wrestling history, man. And he's coming there for vengeance against the current top heel that's soon going to become one of the all-time favorite baby faces in that part of the country. So it all begins with another rare Monday night Coliseum card. We don't have many Monday night shows, but we got a Monday night card that we're talking about in southeastern Knoxville, the early part of the show here. And we'll talk about the interesting TV. It was 2 days before that event. We'll talk about the wild night in the Coliseum when this card did actually take place, and the attendance there. And then we're going to head, obviously, down there toward the Gulf of Mexico and southeastern Gulf Coast. Mm-hmm. And we're in for a big surprise there, Dave, and it ain't a good one, man. We're going to talk about the second major city we started in the territory in its first event. It was our first week there in the territory that we ran more than that one town of Dothan. We're actually going to run 3 in that week. And we're going to look at the cards for 2 of those 3 cities that we're running. They're going to discuss the TV, promoted those cards. We'll talk about the results of the matches and the attendance down there on the Gulf Coast. Mm. And then if we got time permitting, man, we're going to have another learning tree question. And this one I hear is about Ernie Ladd's being in southeastern Gulf Coast from last week's STUDcast. Some question about Ernie Ladd.
Yeah. All right, so, I hope we make it to that point on the show. I'm going to push you on it. All right, so it sounds like a lot happening in both territories at the same time, too. You got a Russian invasion in the north, some kind of disaster in the south. So why don't we start with the card in the Knoxville Coliseum, Monday night, April 10th of 78.
That's a good place to start, my man. Okay, so Rip Smith, who is a great young talent, man, has got his opening match with Doug Gilbert, who is the pro. He is a different pro. We got a pro in the Southern Territory and a pro in the Northern Territory, both of them wearing masks. Dick Steinborn took on the legendary Ron Wright in the second match. Tony Charles wrestled the newcomer, the great Malenko, who was in his first Coliseum event. Tennessee Stud met Don Carson. The Southeastern Tag Belts were on the line again. The champions, Jimmy Golden and Ricky Gibson, were defending against Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson, presented by Ron Wright. And it was the second straight title events for the champions against the same team. Last week, they had a 30-minute time limit draw, and this one is a no time limit match. The next match on that card was a Southeastern Championship match with the champion Robert Fuller defending against a Mongolian Stomper, managed by Gorgeous George Jr. It was the Stomper's first title rematch, chance to get his championship back after he had lost it 3 weeks earlier to Rob. And this one was a no DQ match. And the main event, man, was a cage match. It was no time limit, no DQ, and the loser left Southeastern. Match between Ronnie Garvin and Joe LeDuc. Everything was at stake in this one, man.
That's a pretty good card right there with 7 matches, no less. So what happened on the TV show? And you're talking 2 days before this card in Knoxville.
Well, the show opened with Les running down the card for the day, as usual. And when the cameras backed away from the close-up on him, there was Joe LeDuc sitting next to Les. And behind him was that huge still shot, and it was a shot of the pandemonium at the end of the Lumberjack match from the Sunday before, in which Joe LeDuc was against Ronnie Garvin in the Coliseum. And it showed wrestlers fighting on all four sides of the ring. There was fights everywhere on the floor. And then the two guys that were supposed to be getting thrown out on the floor, possibly, they were the guys who was in the ring. And they were all bloody at this point in this particular shot. So Les, as usual, asked Joe to tell about what was happening in the shot. But before Joe even had the opportunity to say anything, an unfamiliar face appeared on the screen. People had never seen this guy. And it was Boris Malenko. Who was one of, as I said maybe earlier already, one of the best heels in the world. And suddenly there he was in the screen with Joe LeDuc and Les Thatcher. And both, obviously, LeDuc and Thatcher recognized him, but they didn't know he was there for TV. And I doubt hardly any of the Southeastern fans recognized who this guy was, but they're going to know him pretty soon, that's for sure. So LeDuc got up and slowly backed away because he'd had matches against Malenko. He knew who he was, and he knew he was kind of a dangerous dude. You never knew what to expect. So it kind of gave the Russian enough room to push closer in there to Les, and he wanted to say something. And he threw his long, heavy chain that he was famous for in Russian chain matches. That was his gig, man. And he threw that chain on the desk in front of Les. And boy, it landed with a big thud, man. I mean, that thing it probably weighed 100 pounds. Les hadn't even had a chance to speak, and Malenko started right before him. And he has this heavy Russian accent. And he started asking Les, where's Ronnie Garvin? Where's Ronnie Garvin at? And, and then saying, and then basically, Les didn't have any opportunity. He just kept talking. And he said, it's time for him to come out of hiding and deal with his cowardice, in his Russian accent. And I can't do this guy's accent. I'd love to be able to. Wow. It's heavy. So Les was, always upset, man, with surprises, and this one didn't make him happy, that's for sure. So Les basically got on him, and he told Malenko that he wasn't scheduled to be here until Monday night's event, and then he sure wasn't scheduled to be on TV at all, and he says, basically to him, this ain't no way to introduce yourself to Southeastern fans. You can't just come out here and take over. And he basically asked him fairly nice. He said, and if you'd kindly remove your chain from the set and leave now, he says, I'll try to give you a few minutes later in the show during the personality profile. And you can explain why you're out here and doing this, right? So Malenko grabbed his chain, but he leaned over in Les's face before he left, and he told him he was here to settle a vendetta with Ronnie Garvin, and that it was long overdue. And he was going to leave now, but by gosh, he demanded some time on the TV program to vent his grievances with Ronnie Garvin. And then he turned and drug his chain out of there, and he was gone before Les could even respond.
Wow. That's an unusual introduction of a new wrestler, to say the least. I mean, does this have anything to do with surely it does, the audio you and I talked about on the phone last night? You sent me earlier that we might be inserting it in the STUDCAST.
Yes, sir. That's it.
Okay.
Man.
All right.
And in fact, fans are going to hear in that audio that we're going to be inserting into this show exactly what the great Malenko sounded like in 1978.
Yeah.
And it's going to be played later on when we get to the personality profile and this TV show that we're talking about now. So back to where we were before Malenko's interruption of the TV show. So Joe LeDuc came back to the set, and he and Les watched the video from the still shot on the background behind them, and it showed the pandemonium at ringside to the point that, and once the video started, it showed everything. And, and it showed it reached a point to where the referee had no control anywhere, inside the ring nor outside the ring. And he just started having them ring the bell. He just called the match a no contest. And it kind of set the stage, obviously, for a cage match. Where are you going to go if a lumberjack match can't control things? You got to put the steel around them and leave them in that cage. And that was going to... And then, they were going to end this one Joe really talked about it a little bit with Les. He says, I know this is it's no DQ, it's no time limit, and I know that the loser is probably gone forever from Southeastern. So then Joe went to the ring for the first match, and as usual, he bear hugged two of his victims, man, that he had, put them both out with the bear hug, and then he went back to the set, and he took the entire first interview talking about the upcoming cage, the loser leave, all the possibilities of that match. Jimmy Golden and Ricky Gibson in the second match, they brought those tag team belts to the ring, man, and wow, they got a great ovation. Them boys were over. They got another great win too, and they both drop kick guys off the top rope again, and wow, the studio was just really into it. So then they went to the set, and Ron Wright had his Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson team in Studio B ready for the second interview. And wow, these tag matches these kids were having were absolutely phenomenal, man. And so, it was going to be another classic match, that tag match on the following Monday night.
Wow. Okay. So I guess it was time for the personality profile, Ron. Is this the spot where you say you want to play the actual recorded audio from 78 of the great Malenko that you sent?
Well, it is, but first, Dave, I want to kind of set the tone and for this short audio clip,
right?
Before we play it, so this was the beginning of a major change in the direction of Southeastern Knoxville. It's going to take place on this show, as a matter of fact, and this change is going to take Knoxville wrestling to the next level. So I want fans to know a little bit about what was said on the profile before this 1 minute of audio that I have sent you. Mm-hmm. So for those who have never heard the great Malenko make an interview, I think you're going to find this very interesting. So the profile began with him sitting with Les, and he had his Russian chain in his lap. And Malenko told very little about why he was coming in or why he wanted to get even with Garvin. Only something about it was personal, and it happened between them and Florida years earlier. And he said when he started discussing entering Southeastern Wrestling months ago, he had demanded that the company, and Don Curtis in particular, allow his first match against Garvin to be a Russian chain match, which was, as he said, my specialty. And he said that they complied with his request. Mm-hmm. And, this was months earlier, and they said, here's your date, come on in. And then he said, but prior to my arrival, just a week or so ago, he says, they pulled their permission for me to have the Russian chain match. They changed their minds on me, right? Mm-hmm. They got me here, and now they've changed their minds on giving me the match I want. And he said his demand, had been refused. And so Dave, let's play that audio right here, and I think he's going to explain in this short 1 minute kind of his feelings about this and how upset he is.
All right, here it is.
But pay close attention. I've hired a battery of attorneys to serve the Southeastern Wrestling Organization and Don Curtis, the president, with a court injunction. If they don't do it the right way, they'll do it my way. Because I'll tell you something, money talks, and it's going to talk with the attorneys that I have hired, and this chain match next week. I will be back on this wrestling TV program, and I will bring you people the best news that you've ever had, and I'm going for one person and one person only, and that person is Ronnie Garvin. And I will offer you, because I know this court injunction will go toward my favor, and I'm positive of it, that I will be back with this chain, and I will ask you to sign the contract.
Okay, wow. So I could barely remember how the dude even sounded. I saw the look from the YouTube video on Southeastern Rewind, but the voice still gives me chill bumps. This was great stuff for Southeastern Knoxville, adding another quality heel to the crew at a time. I don't know that you had to have another heel, but you sure got a good one with this one. So it's no wonder things just kept rocking there during this time period.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing good. I mean, this show was going to continue, man, to rock it as well. I'll tell you, this was a great show. So the Mongolian Stomper was the next person on the TV, and he was determined to get his Southeastern belt back after his loss 3 weeks earlier to my brother. With Rob had the belt, and wow, Stomper was always intense. But Rob told me, because I wasn't there that day, I'm in Alabama to do TV that day, that he thought the mere addition, man, of another top heel like Malenko to the crew kind of set Stomper on fire. And so, competition among heels was great for your business, man. It was great for a territory to have heels trying to get over better than the other heel. So Stomper destroyed, man, his young opponent, Rob said, and he went to the set with GG. And GG was still bragging to the studio as he followed the old monster of Stomper to the set. And Robert did his interview from Studio B. He had the belt over his shoulder, he told me, and the belt, Stomper wanted back badly, man. Stomper was really lost without a belt to put around his waist. And GG was as proud as a peacock of his man's destruction in that TV match he just left, and he predicted it was going to happen again 2 days later to Rob. So the last match had a little twist in it, man, to the show. And from the very beginning, Ronnie Garvin, he had asked for 2 opponents in this match, because Joe LeDuc had been wrestling 2 guys in every match since he came to Southeastern. Ronnie Garvin had asked to have 2 opponents in his TV match. So that slow turn of Garvin that we were doing from heel to babyface, it was now about 50-50 with the crowd. Half the people were cheering him and half of them were booing him. And the personality and profile in this particular show, with an obvious heel now taking shots at him, helped kind of swing that percentage even higher toward being a babyface. So Garvin was just as fired up as the Stomper was in his match. He pummeled the 2 opponents he had. He jumped off the top rope in both of them's throat, and then he pulled one on top of the other and covered them both to get the win. So studio audience, at this point, they're all in, man. They've seen this new Russian guy, and he's there, and he's mad at Garvin, and they're so they see Garvin really take these 2 boys to task, man, and really takes care of them big time. So man, they're really showing their respect. They're all on their feet, man. They're all in Garvin at this point, and So, but the show wasn't over yet, and the great Malenko, man, shot in the ring behind Garvin. Garvin had his back turned to him. Garvin was the referee's raising his hand, and he never saw him coming. And the Russian, man, nailed him, man, with his chain in the back of the head first. Garvin went down face first, and crowd went totally silent. They was like, wow. What is good? This crazy. So Malenko turned Garvin over on his back. And he took his time. Rob says he was no big rush. He took his time because he'd already hit him in the back of the head, and he was half out. And he said he put the links of the chain over his fist, and he said he dropped on his knees, and when he did, he drove the chain into Garvin's forehead. And Rob told me, he said, I was sitting up there in the control room upstairs, and he said, I could see the blood squirt straight up in the air. God. He said, wow, it was unbelievable. And he said, Rob said, Bill Kincaid, who was the director of the show, he always asked when I brought in a new hero, he had the same question. And he said, Bill Kincaid asked him immediately the same question he always asked me when Dangerous Heel made his debut. He asked Rob, he said, where did Ron find this one?
Oh, my God. One of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tony Charles, man, the opponent for the great Malenko on the next Monday night's card. His first night in, he's wrestling Tony Charles. Tony Charles is standing there watching this match, and boy, he flew in the ring to aid Garvin. And Malenko had done his damage. He wasn't going to fight with Charles. He'd done what he came for. And he drug his chain out of there, and he left the ring. And on his way past Les, the set, though, you could be heard screaming at Les. Rob said you could hear him say, he bet that Southeastern that Garvin now might be ready for a chain match. This might make it happen.
Yeah.
So, Les was speechless, but the studio wasn't. They cheered Tony and Garvin. And Garvin Rob went down and brought a towel to him, and he had an interview to do, and he couldn't go out there with all that blood on him, so he was wiping his face and he was trying to get himself together. And so him and Charles went to the set with Les for the last interview, and when the cameras went into Studio B, there stood a strange couple, Joe LeDuc standing with the great Malenko. And Les started off with him because he wanted to give Garvin an opportunity to get his wits together, man, get the blood off of him a little bit and get ready to do his thing. So the fans had, at this point, as soon as they saw him standing there with the Russian, they went total heel on him. They were like, wow. This is Joe LeDuc. I can't believe what you've done. And so Joe LeDuc, big smile on his face. He welcomed his friend to Florida, and he thanked him for coming. He said, "You're here at the perfect time." He said, "I got this cage match, and the loser's going to leave Southeastern." And he said, he thanked Malenko. He said, "Thank you for taking your chain in there and rattling old Garvin's brain." He said, and now it's about time for me to finish by crushing his body Monday night.
Wow.
And he ended by telling fans that he wanted to see Ronnie Garvin again if they ever wanted to see him. "Do you like Ronnie Garvin?" He said, "Show up Monday night because that's his last match ever in Southeastern." So they switched over to the other studio, back to the set, and Ronnie was still wiping blood off his forehead and out of his eyes. And he told Les, he didn't care if they put both LeDuc and Malenko in the cage with him Monday night. Stick them both in there, man. That way I'll know where they are, And he said, "I'm coming prepared for anything and anybody." And he said he was going to send Joe LeDuc out of Southeastern back to Canada, and then he was going to let the great Malenko know he had come to the wrong place, that this wasn't Russia. This wasn't Florida wrestling. This was Southeastern wrestling. And here he was the new king. And before he was done with Malenko, he said, "I'm going to stick that Russian chain where the sun don't shine."
All right. That's a pretty wild TV and a great way to get a heel over in one day, Ron. So what happened in the Knoxville Coliseum Monday night, April 10th of 78?
Well, Rip Smith beat Doug Gilbert, the pro. Ron Wright kind of stole a win from Dick Steinborn. The great Malenko gave a rare loss to Tony Charles. And in the process, he also opened him up. For the first time, Tony Charles bled in Southeastern. So Malenko is really, really creating. He's creating a stir, man. The Tennessee Stud beat Don Carson. Gibson and Golden retained their belts. They got a DQ win over Condrey and Hickerson, walked away with the Southeastern tag belts again. Robert Fuller kept his Southeastern belt. Gigi got involved, and the Tennessee Stud got involved also. And it cost Stomper the chance to get his title back. But next week's main event, man, in Knoxville is going to have a much more important risk involved in it than just the championship. It's going to be a pretty heavy-duty one next week as the main event. The cage match this night was crazy. Joe LeDuc was booed for the first time since he came to Southeastern Wrestling, and he really didn't mind. And in fact, in this match, Dave, he got in the ring and he intentionally, every time he got Garvin on his back, he kept going over and unloosening a turnbuckle on the top rope. And then when Garvin would get up, he'd go put him down again, and he would go back. And at a certain point, he loosened it enough that he could get the top rope off the ring. And when he did that, he was going to use that turnbuckle on Ronnie Garvin. Now, those turnbuckles were about 12, 14 inches long. They probably weighed about 10, 15 pounds each. Very, very heavy steel. Wow. And when he got ready to hit Garvin with it, Garvin blocked him. He took that away from him, and he beat him. I saw somebody sent me something on social media, a fan that said he was there that night, saw this match, and he said Ronnie Garvin beat Joe LeDuc with that turnbuckle like it was a baseball bat. It was one of the bloodiest matches in the history of Southeastern wrestling, and he left Joe LeDuc laying.
Wow.
Joe LeDuc was carried to the dressing room on a stretcher, in fact, that night, and it was the last match he ever had in southeastern Knoxville.
No kidding. What a night. All right, so you had to have a pretty big crowd for Joe LeDuc's last night.
Well, it wasn't on a Sunday afternoon. It was a Monday night, bear in mind, but I think if it had been a Sunday afternoon, it would have been a complete sellout.
Wow.
And even with it being a Sunday night, it was 5,600. So
wow.
Well into the fives,
Yeah.
So the business was great.
Yeah. All right. Hey, I tell you what, it's a good place for a break. And while you're taking the break, you got time to check out ClassicContinentalWrestling.com, www.ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. It's streaming everything that you see on YouTube's Southeastern Rewind and a whole lot more. And you can check it all out right now. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. All right, we'll be back. This STUDCAST will continue in a moment right here. The best old school deal in wrestling is ClassicContinentalWrestling.com, the Tennessee Stud streaming channel. Only $4.99 per month, $39.99 per year, with a limited time only free 1-week trial. Every 1988 USA TV show ever done. 24 1985 Continental TV shows now. Hundreds more to come. Plus hundreds of 1980 to 1985 classic Southeastern TV shows, documentaries, Superstars of the Past series, 3-hour Stars of the Sport series, current STUDCAST, every stud story ever done, and unique content from the stud found nowhere else. Subscribe at ClassicContinentalWrestling.com and get it all. $4.99 per month or $39.99 per year with a free 1-week trial. Hurry, this offer ends soon. All right, STUDCAST fans, welcome back. Another STUDCAST with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. I'm David Summers. All right, Stud, let's get right back into it. Where are we riding next on this STUDCAST?
Well, we're headed south, my man. Lots of good things for the future happening, obviously, in Knoxville during this week. But it was not a great day or a great time for Southeastern Gulf Coast. So I was in Knoxville that night. It was a Monday night and had pretty much a full Coliseum just about. And there was another match going on in Southeastern Gulf Coast down in Montgomery, Alabama. It was the first ever Southeastern Gulf Coast event. It was in the beautiful downtown Montgomery Civic Center, and it was a disaster. So for the first time ever, I got a long distance call for me in the Coliseum office. Somebody came from down up top upstairs and said, "Ron, you got a call. Can you come upstairs?" So, and when I got up there, I was surprised to hear the voice of Bob Armstrong. He was on the phone, Montgomery Civic Center office, and he told me they were only about 10 minutes away from start time. But he said, "Ron, we got less than 100 people in the building." And he asked me what they should do. And first I was shocked. I mean, I hadn't expected things to be that bad. And I knew it was an opening night, but, Montgomery's a much bigger city than Dothan. And, I couldn't figure out what the deal was, but they had seen the number of same number of TV shows as Dothan had seen because the stations were there when I bought that territory. But obviously that city, Montgomery, wasn't in near as good a shape as the much smaller Dothan was. Mm-hmm. So Bob asked me, "What should we do, Ron?" And I said, "Do we run this show or not?" And obviously, a very difficult decision to make right away, instantly. It's an instant decision here just about because I got to go in the ring. So I told Bob to have the ticket sellers return the money to the fans and announce that we wouldn't return there for at least a month. And then instead of the schedule for Monday night, the following Monday night, we backed it off for a month. Now, Roy Lee Welch was down there. He had already moved into Pensacola, and he was handling box offices. And so I got him on the phone, and I told him to write the wrestlers' checks for the night and tell them that we're going to be running in Dothan and we're going to be running on Saturday night in New Brockton. So we'd see them for the weekend. So I didn't, it's kind of crazy, man.
Wow. Okay, so I really didn't expect to hear that. It had to kind of take the wind out of your sails. So what were you thinking?
Wow. Well, I got a little sick almost, man. I knew that the Gulf Coast territory was in bad shape when I bought it, but I didn't know it was in that bad a shape. It was the first time since I became an owner of a wrestling company that I'd had to give fans their money back because the crowd was too small to run an event. And that happened in a lot of places. And gosh, nowadays they run events commonly that don't have enough people to run it, in my opinion.
Right.
But back in those days, it was pretty unusual. So I instantly pretty much started to get a little depressed, in spite of the fact that there I was when I walked out of that office. I looked, and there's about 6,000 people in the building I'm in. So, no,
Right.
I couldn't get too sad, right? So I kind of had to jerk myself up, man, get my head together, and I went back to the dressing room and with a smile on my face. I didn't tell anybody what was going on down there, and it was hard to do, but I was going to need to do it some more in the future down there. I mean, it was going to be tough. So Dothan, Alabama was the exception to the rule in that territory. Before I bought it, it had always been one of the better towns. Now it was by far the best that was still there. And we were going to, live off that town basically for the next month, because obviously we're not going to be back into Montgomery for a month. And we had several other cities that were about to open, though. We had Panama City, we had Pensacola, and we had yet to wrestle in the biggest market in Mobile. So I realized that Knoxville, even though I thought it was bad when I bought it and took it over, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. And over the next month, when I was in southeastern Gulf Coast and things were bad, I began to repeat that old saying, when things got that day, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So let's get going and see what the card was for Dothan, Alabama on Friday, April 14, 78. So the opening match that night was Mike Stallings versus an old veteran heel, man, in the Gulf Coast, Eddie Sullivan. Been there for a long time. Good heel. David Schultz was taking on Robert Gibson. Second match. Next match was one of the highlights of the last week's card, where Eddie Mansfield surprised the wrestling pro. He bloodied him up, almost unmasked him. And they were back on the card again. And this time, though, they weren't the first match, man. They had worked their way 2 matches up. They're moving up the card. Big Bill Dromo was back again, and he was going to face the Assassins managed by Rip Tyler for a second time. This time he had a totally different partner than the man he had wrestled with last week. The guy that had beat Ernie Ladd was his partner, and Charlie Cook was teaming up with Bill Dromo to go after the Assassins. And the main event was another return match between myself and Bob Armstrong. And again, the winner of the match is going to get the $10,000 prize for winning the 2-week Battle Royal, which is now 2 weeks earlier. It hasn't been anybody win that money yet. So this time, the match was going to be a Canadian Lumberjack match. It's going to have wrestlers surrounding the ring to throw the participants back in when they left the ring for whatever purpose. And this one was a no time limit, no DQ, and there had to be a winner. Somebody was going to get the $10,000 the following Friday night.
Hey, I'll tell you what, that's a pretty good card right there. That's a great card. I'm really looking forward to hearing about that Eddie Mansfield versus the Wrestling Pro match, as well as the main event. Tell us about, and I think the TV for this is going to be April 8th of 78, always 6 days before the card in Dothan, the one you just described.
Correct. That's the date, and I think that's the right date. April 8th it would have been. So I have to admit, man, I learned a quick lesson already in southeastern Gulf Coast. I had originally planned when I came there, and in fact, I recruited talent, to bring a whole new crew starting down there. But once I watched that Eddie Mansfield and Wrestling Pro match the week before, I realized that there was great value in some of those former stars of the Gulf Coast down there, like the Wrestling Pro. So, that being said, I opened the TV the next day with the Wrestling Pro, watching the video of a very good match of his that he had with Mansfield. And he sat there, and it was a little difficult for him. He had to watch the youngster hit him with a gimmick and bust him open, and then almost pull his mask off at the end. And he had to give Eddie Mansfield some credit. And then he said to Charlie Platt, he said, the kid, the kid looked real good against me. He goes, I have to admit it. And he goes, and I want to have a return match because I'm going to give this kid a lesson. So, and the kid then had the first live match. Eddie Mansfield went right in the ring after he left the set with Charlie Platt. And he had himself a good win, and it gained a lot of confidence in that match, and it showed in his TV match. And he was wrestling a much bigger guy on TV, and it didn't make any difference. I mean, he took it to him, boy, and he left him laying. So then Eddie Mansfield watched the earlier interview. In Dothan, we did interviews. Instead of being able to do them at the same time in a different studio, we pre-recorded interviews. And then the wrestler you were wrestling, you got to see his comments and you made your comments. So Eddie Mansfield watched the pros' comments that were pre-recorded. And then he made a pretty darn good interview. I was really surprised. I was proud of him. The second segment of the show opened up with Ernie Ladd, who had stayed over for TV. Wow, what a great guy. I asked him, I said, Ernie, you flying out? Yeah, I'm going to fly out, but not till late tomorrow afternoon. And I said, would you work TV for me? What a great guy. He says, heck yeah, Ron, I'll do whatever you want, So he was flying out to wrestle in Houston, Texas on Saturday night. So he had really taken a liking to Charlie Cook, and the first time he'd ever worked with him. The week before where Charlie won. So I pushed my luck a little bit, finding out that he liked Charlie. And, and I said, I got an idea. Would you do this for me? And, wow, he liked my idea. And we're going to really push Charlie Cook. So Ladd dressed to wrestle, and he went out in the show, and he watched the video where he lost to Charlie Cook from the night before. And he was such a great talent, man, and he was so cool on interviews. He turned that loss into a humiliation to Charlie Cook. He just bragged about how he humiliated this guy. And he's a very inferior wrestler, he called him. And then about the time he said that in the video, Charlie Cook caught him in a small package, man, and he got the 3 count. So... and Ernie covered that up too, man. He says, you know what? He says, Charlie Platt, he says, if I wrestled that guy 1,000 times, that'd never happen again. So then he told Charlie Platt, he said, the reason I'm dressed here to wrestle, he says, whenever I lose a match, he says, which is very rare, I hardly ever lose. He says, I like to get right back in the ring, like getting on a horse after he bucks you up. I want to get back in the ring quick. And I want to beat somebody up, And he said, that'll make me feel better about losing to somebody as bad a wrestler as Charlie Cook is, right? So he went to the ring with his opponent already in the ring. And lo and behold, Charlie Cook comes busting out of the dressing room, and he goes to the ring. He's heard the interview. He's seen the deal, and he got a huge pop from the crowd because, man, just the night before he had beat one of the greatest wrestlers in the world, and he got a big pop, and he walked straight over to Ladd's opponent, and wow. They had a little private conversation, and the wrestler, I guess, liked what he heard because he wasn't particularly happy that he was going to have to wrestle Ernie Ladd anyway, and he just left the ring.
Yeah, let's make a deal.
Charlie Cook says, "I want this match. Get your ass out of here."
Yeah. Wow.
And he gladly left. I think he had a smile on his face when he left. And then Ladd stood there and he watched what was going on. And then when he saw the guy leave, he went right straight over to Charlie Cook and he got in his face. And you couldn't tell what he was saying, but you could tell he was giving him hell. So, and Charlie just stood there and he took it, and wow, the studio got the buzzing, man. They're face to face and the studio's like, geez, well, what's this going to turn out to be? So Ladd basically, I think, said, okay, you want to do it again? We'll do it again. And when Ladd turned around and he started back to the corner, the timekeeper rang the bell. Charlie Cook was looking at Ladd's back, and he just ran across the ring and he shoved Ernie Ladd face first into the turnbuckles. Oh. O'Connor rolled him and covered him, and 1, 2, 3.
Are you kidding?
And the studio exploded. I mean, Charlie Cook had beat. It was amazing, man.
Whoa. All right, wait a second. Charlie Cook beat the legendary Ernie Ladd twice in 24 hours?
That's exactly what I'm thinking, man.
Man.
We had an instant superstar on our hands, man. I thought that studio was going to get Cook up on their shoulders and carrying him back to Dothan.
Wow.
It's like they were all fired up. The rest of the show was like riding a rocket ship. I mean, I came out next for the personality profile. I was booed so loud they could hear it in Montgomery. I mean, that studio was lit up. And so I watched the $10,000 winner-take-all match with Armstrong from the night before. And obviously it ended up with almost everybody in both dressing rooms out there trying to separate me and Armstrong. And Charlie Platt and I set up the match for the next week, man, a first ever Southeastern Gulf Coast Lumberjack match. It was going to be wrestlers around the ring, going to keep Armstrong and I inside the ring until a winner was decided. There was going to be no time limit, no disqualification, and there had to be a winner. Somebody's going to walk away with the $10,000 next Friday night. So then the Assassins come to the ring. They're managed by Rip Tyler, and they hit the ring running. These guys were so on fire, young guys, and really starting to get over. And another big win, man. They got them a great big win, and then they led. That went right into the interview about their tag match the following Friday night. Big Bill Dromo from the Georgia territory had stayed over for me just to do the interview. And Charlie Cook joined him, man, after just beating Ernie Ladd the second time. And they're against the undefeated Assassins the next Friday night. And then the TV closed with the man, Bob Armstrong. He tore the house down. It was the sixth time, man. Only the sixth show since we'd opened the territory. And that was about all the time that was necessary for a wrestler like Bob Armstrong to get over. Fans just loved Bob Armstrong wherever he went. And it wasn't any different there in Lower Alabama, man. They were big Armstrong fans already. So we closed the TV, man, with a recorded interview. I did the recorded interview, and I had surrounded myself by all the heels. And I was bragging about splitting the $10,000 with them if they worked Bob Armstrong over every time I send him out on the floor to you, man. And if you help me, we're going to all split the money, And so then, boom, they threw it back to the studio, and there was Bob Armstrong, and he was surrounded by the baby faces. The studio crowd was still rocking since that Ernie Ladd moment, man. They were on fire. And in spite of what had happened on Monday in Montgomery, I felt real good about what happened on this TV, and I felt good about the future of Southeastern Gulf Coast.
Wow. Sounds like kind of an up and down week, Stud. So what happened 6 days later in the Dothan matches?
Well, Mike Stallings beat Eddie Sullivan. David Schultz beat Robert Gibson. Eddie Mansfield, with a little help from David Schultz, beat the Wrestling Pro. Well, quite a bit of help from David Schultz, but since I was a heel at the time, I'll just say it was a little bit of help from David Schultz. The Assassins, managed by Rip Tyler, defeated Bill Dromo. They beat Dromo in the match. Charlie Cook, though, looked like dynamite. Wow, he stole the show, man. He was on his way to being a star. Charlie Cook and his wins over Ernie Ladd made a different wrestler out of him. I won the $10,000 in the Lumberjack match with Armstrong, just like I predicted in the last TV interview 6 days earlier. With my mob of heels out there on the floor, I just kept tossing him out, and they beat him up, and then they throw him back in. And after a while, it got to where the referee didn't focus on me when I was standing there. He was more focused on what the heels were doing to Bob Armstrong while he's out there on the ground. And that just gave me a little advantage there, and I pulled a little something out of my trunks, and I nailed old Mr. Goody Two-Shoes with it, and I won the match. In the $10,000.
Okay. All right. So what was the attendance?
Well, before I answer that, I got to draw some attention to the results of that card that we just talked about. If you paid attention, Heels won 4 out of the 5 matches. And as I've been saying all along here since we got down there, heat on the heels was the way we were going to find success in southeastern Gulf Coast. And by golly, we were socking it to them, man. We were making people angry. So we went up the attendance. We went up on the attendance 100 fans. Not a gigantic jump, but not a huge spurt. But it wasn't a Montgomery disaster either. You know, I mean. Heads were up. The attitude was good with all the guys. We had new cities opening up, and it was full steam ahead.
Well, that's interesting that even 100 additional seats being filled was still encouraging and moves the needle in your mind's eye. That's cool. All right. So speaking of new cities, didn't you run the next night in a small city close to Dothan? Is country town, New Brockton?
New Brockton.
Yeah,
little bitty country town. You're right about it. A little
right.
Tiny town, man. And after what had happened the first night of the week in Montgomery, Bob and I realized that the Dothan part of the territory was probably the place we need to focus. Man, it seemed to be that's where fans were still there. And so we picked this small city because of its proximity to Dothan. That's 30 miles, something like that, outside Dothan. It's right there close.
Yeah, probably,
right?
yeah.
You know, and its building, Dave, I don't know if you're ever in its building, it's an exact replica of the Dothan building.
Yeah, the farm center.
The same building.
Yeah, okay.
It's small.
Right.
So, you know, and that was our first Saturday night town that we ran in southeastern Gulf Coast history was New Brockton, and we ran it on that Saturday night.
All right, so how'd you do in New Brockton?
Well, we did a lot better than we did in Montgomery. I can say that. I guess we probably had about 600 fans, but it was enough to run the show.
But dang, you know? that's not bad. 600.
Yeah, 600 shows, 600 fans. You know, I mean, that area over there around Dothan was really strong.
Yeah,
man, we could never really figure it out, but it always was. And as long as we were there, it was. And it became bigger and bigger, as you're aware, man. It just it becomes monster.
And I remember on the TV shows in Dothan, they would say, and on the certain night in New Brockton. So New Brockton got mentioned on the TV show like every time there was a TV show. So you knew there was going to be wrestling on that particular night. So
we went back there pretty regularly because we needed a good Saturday night town. And this 600 fans, Dave, is going to become over 1,000.
Wow.
In that little town before it's over, you know? So it was a small crowd, but it was an enthusiastic one. They knew the wrestlers. They were into the matches. They were into the heels, and they were booing the heels and cheering the baby faces. It gave all of the wrestlers, man, a lot of hope for the future. They watched this town, and I pumped it. I said, guys, this is what it's going to be like in all of them, you know? So, before we finish it, Dave, I'm going to change gears a little bit on the STUDCAST here, and especially when it comes to southeastern Gulf Coast. Now, our largest population area in that territory was obviously the biggest city was Mobile, Alabama, and the biggest TV market, because Mobile not only covered Mobile, it covered another big city in Florida, Pensacola. So we didn't run a show there yet, but we'd been on TV there for about 8 weeks at this point. And it was kind of early to be trying to draw a crowd, you know, but I was a little desperate. I mean, Montgomery failed for us miserably, you know, and all we had going was Dothan, and now we had a little New Brockton. But I kind of said, we got to go there. We've got to go there, Bob. We talked about it. And so we didn't go to Mobile. We picked Pensacola. And it was kind of like it was time to do or die, man. You know, we were going to go under if we didn't have our crew down there and more towns to work in. So we looked west, man, and toward Mobile and Pensacola, and we decided let's run Pensacola for the first time ever. Yeah. So we're going to start running some more towns there, and there's going to be a lot more to talk about there.
Wow. That's cool. That's how you start watching this thing spread out. All right, it is time for our learning tree question. We made it, Stud. So let's get ready for that. This one, Ron, is very appropriate for this episode. A gentleman named Mark Frazier asked, regarding Ernie Ladd's appearance in southeastern Gulf Coast, did you try to convince Ernie to stay full-time in your territory?
Well, and I hate to laugh, but wow, it's a great question, Mark. I mean, having a talent like Ernie Ladd in my territory, man, in even Knoxville, I would have been. It was an honor. It was an honor to deal with Ernie Ladd, and wow, what a guy he was, man! To do what he did for Charlie Cook was just unbelievable. And I'd never met Ernie Ladd until he showed up in Dothan for the show 2 weeks earlier. And of course, I would love to have him as a top heel, but Southeastern Gulf Coast, it wasn't anywhere near ready to support a star like Ernie Ladd, man. We'd just given the money back on our first show in Montgomery. And so, we couldn't afford an Ernie Ladd. It would become a major market, Montgomery in the future. But the key word for Southeastern at this point was future. Everything always just pointed to the future. I mean, we had a long way to go. So Ernie Ladd was a top star. He could go anywhere he wanted to in the world. He was probably making as much as any wrestler in the world at that time. I don't doubt it, because he wasn't working one territory. He was working the big cities. And to prove that, in this episode, he was going to leave Dothan, Alabama after this TV with Charlie Cook, letting Charlie Cook beat him. And he was going to fly into Houston, Texas to work one of the biggest wrestling cities in the world for one of the all-time best NWA promoters ever, the great Paul Bosch. I'll guarantee you he's going to wrestle in front of 10,000 plus on that Saturday night. He could work anywhere in the world. So Mr. Frazier, Southeastern Gulf Coast at this time, in my opinion, we had the perfect crew for a territory that had been dead for some time. We had a bunch of young and hungry guys, talented guys, man, with great futures ahead of them. And they were all willing to work hard for small money, just for the opportunity to prove themselves and to become great workers. And they were going to make big money later. David Schultz, future Hall of Famer. Assassin Randy Colley, future star as one of the Moondogs. Robert Gibson, rock and roll Hall of Famer, man. These guys were young and hungry, man, and they were willing to sacrifice for the success of a territory. So, Mr. Frazier, I appreciate your question, man. It was a very valid question. And I found out that when trying to build a territory so dead that you had to refund the money to fans because you didn't have enough of them in the building to even have the event, you literally had to walk before you ran. So in 1978, Southeastern Gulf Coast, in the beginning, we were barely able to walk. With young talent, though, that were scratchers and diggers. But we were going to eventually, man, turn that sucker around, and we'd be able to run with the big dogs like Ernie Ladd.
Wow. Holy cow. The big cat, you called him the big dog, the big cat, he died in 2007. And I want to see if you'll give me just a minute. Was this what he did for Charlie Cook? Just the kind of man that he was? How well did you come to know him?
Oh, yeah. I worked with him. As time went on, he came and worked. Me and him worked in Mobile and the little expo hall and put more bleachers in there. We drew the biggest crowd ever in that little expo hall. We put 7,000 people in the building for 4,000, me against Ernie Ladd.
Wow.
But it was probably 3 years later.
And how tall was he? Was he 6'9"?
Same height. We looked eye to eye.
Oh, God, that was the Twin Towers taking each other on.
Oh, yeah, man. And what a great interview he did for me. He sent that interview in to me, and I had bad knee because I'd suffered that Bob Armstrong incident with Ric Flair. And he sent in an interview about walking on the cane. And he's going to walk in on the cane and out on the cane.
Hey, but what he did for Charlie Cook, that was, he took the pen twice.
Yeah, it said everything about what he was as a wrestler. He's the exact model of what you wanted as a wrestler. He had no ego.
Yeah.
He wanted to help.
Yeah.
He wanted
Yeah.
to get your people over. He wanted to make money, and he wanted to give guys breaks.
Wow.
And wow.
Holy
he did.
cow.
He gave
Yeah.
Charlie Cook the greatest break I think I ever saw a heel do for another heel.
Well, I got to tell you, that's one of the reasons I really love this Studcast, is hearing that part of the story. So I like all of these Studcasts, just the memories that are brought back. Success in one territory, another one is barely hanging on. It just makes the ride a real eye-opener and a ton of fun. And thanks for that footnote about the big cat. That's really good stuff. All right, listen, folks, on Facebook, to become friends with Ron, please go to the Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud Facebook page, like him and follow him there, and you automatically become friends with a legend. On Twitter, follow him at Ron Fuller Welch. The website, visit the Stud on his tremendous website, tnstud.com, tnstud.com. You'll find great videos, a photo gallery, every Studcast ever done. 43 super Studcast are there as well. And his Stud store, all kinds of souvenirs, classic Continental 5-pack of videos, and his thrilling lion novel called Brutus. Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. Let's mention that, where much of what the Stud is famous for is displayed. Continental and USA TV shows are there. Stud stories, Gulf Coast and Southeastern classic matches, and so much more. And the place you find everything that Ron has ever done is his amazing streaming channel. It's out there now. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. You got to check it out. It's all there now and always will be. New superstars of the past series. 3-hour Stars of the Sport series, Wildcat Wendell Cooley documentary, and coming next week, the world premiere of Tony Anthony's Dirty White Boy documentary, with the original classic Southeastern TV shows coming soon. Subscribe at Classic Continental Wrestling now. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. Only $4.99 per month or $39.99 per year. Subscribe now. It's going to be the best old school streaming site on the planet ever. Right now, get the special free 1-week trial on ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. Man, that's a ton of stuff to be involved in. So where do we ride next week, Stud?
Well, Southeastern Knoxville, man, it's been on fire for a long time. But what happened in this episode and what we're going to talk about in next week is it's going to be like throwing gas on the fire, man. Garvin's going to begin his journey to becoming the biggest baby face in the territory's history. The great Malenko has stepped into a spot that's going to take him to Garvin's spot as a heel, top guy. Southeastern Gulf Coast, we're finally focusing on its largest population. Pensacola is going to have its first event. Mobile is going to open soon. And this territory alone, by itself, it'll make a spellbinding tale for every Studcast, just talking about what's going to happen in Southeastern Gulf Coast. It's going to keep fans wondering about what's next. And then we have another interesting learning tree question that comes from a fan watching obviously, this one comes from somebody that's watching the great Continental TV shows on YouTube, Southeastern Rewind channel, and also on the ClassicContinentalWrestling.com streaming channel. And his question is something about the feud between Exotic Adrian Street, Norvell Austin, and the women that were in their matches and their lives. So thanks, as always, man, to everybody out there listening to us today. And please tell your friends about us. Take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains, I'm David Summers, saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.